Yeah, guy, black shirt running. Hey, drop it. Drop it. Drop that shit. Drop it. Drop the fucking gun. Drop the fucking gun. Drop the fucking gun. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Hey, so look at what shot fired. Shot fired. Drop the fucking gun. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Don't fucking touch it. Don't fucking touch it. Don't fucking touch it. Turn around. Turn the fuck around. Turn the fuck around.
It was late afternoon in Fort Worth, Texas, when neighbors on Beacon Way heard a single gunshot pierce the calm. A man collapsed at the edge of his driveway, his phone still clutched in his hand. That man was 7-year-old Kevin Brown, Sr. He had walked outside just moments earlier to check his mailbox, completely unaware that his every step was part of a carefully laid trap. What made the tragedy unbearable wasn't just the violence, but the betrayal. Because the man who had orchestrated Kevin's death wasn't a stranger or a rival. It was his own son, a rising rapper known on the streets as Crazy Boy Bray. And the betrayal that drove him to it was darker than anything anyone could have imagined. But to understand how a father's life ended at his own mailbox, we need to rewind to the streets, to the music, and to the tangled family secrets that ignited a storm of rage. Fort Worth is a city of contradictions. To visitors, it's all cowboy hats and Southern hospitality, where old Texas charm blends with modern business. But beneath that surface lies a harder truth. Fort Worth has one of the highest crime rates in the state, its neighborhoods long scarred by gang rivalries and gun violence. Kevin Brown, Sr., lived in one of those neighborhoods. Born in 1974, he was known by friends as a father who worked hard to keep his family steady, even when life threw endless obstacles in his way. He wasn't famous, he wasn't powerful, he was just a man trying to provide. Yet his name would soon become etched into the city's history in the most horrific way. The person tied to his downfall was his son, Breland Brown Jr. To the world, Breland was Crazy Boy Bray, a rapper with raw lyrics that pulled in millions of views. He had collaborated with well-known Dallas artist Mo3, and his verses painted vivid pictures of gang life, loyalty, and betrayal. Fans saw him as the gritty voice of Fort Worth's street rap, but behind the music was a young man trapped in a world of violence he couldn't escape and wouldn't let go of. Authorities knew him not just as a musician, but as a member of the Rolling 60 Seconds Crips, one of the city's most notorious gangs. His reputation wasn't built only on beats and rhymes. It was cemented by a trail of violence that followed him wherever he went. In January 2020, the first cracks in his path began to show. On the night of January 9th, a 3-year-old woman named Anjanette Annan Eubanks was shot inside a home on Canyon Circle Drive. She was remembered as a kind, motherly figure, someone who had nothing to do with the beef that consumed the city's rap scene. But that didn't matter. Eubanks became the first casualty linked directly to Breland's feud with a teenage rival rapper known as Channel 5 J-Dub. Just 3 days later, the violence escalated. On January 12th, 7-year-old Cheyenne Moore, a high school student with her entire life ahead of her, was gunned down on East Rosedale Street. Once again, prosecutors would tie the killing back to Breland's reckless campaign. 2 innocent lives gone in the span of days. These killings stunned the community. They made it clear that Breland wasn't just another aspiring rapper talking tough in his lyrics. His words were bleeding into the real world. Every feud, every verse about betrayal or revenge was becoming a prophecy written in bullets. But even those tragedies weren't the darkest part of the story. Because while Breland sat behind bars awaiting trial for those murders, something far more personal was happening within his own family. Kevin Brown, Sr., his father, had begun a secret relationship with a woman named Rebecca Shea Willis. On the surface, it might have looked like any ordinary relationship between two adults, but there was nothing ordinary about it. Shea had already been involved with Kevin's other son, Kevin Jr., and even had a baby with him. Now, she was having a child with their father. It was a scandal that crossed boundaries that should never have been crossed. And for a family already scarred by loss and violence, it was gasoline poured on a fire. Kevin Jr. himself had died years earlier in a robbery attempt. His absence left a wound the family never fully healed from, and now, the woman tied to his memory was at the center of a new storm, one that would tear the Browns apart for good. For Breland, sitting in a cell, the revelation was unbearable. To him, it wasn't just messy or complicated. It was betrayal of the highest order. He began calling his father grimy, a man who had crossed his own son's bloodline. The shame festered, eating at him day after day, until the thought of his father's continued existence felt like a stain that could never be washed away. And so, from a prison cell where most men would feel powerless, Breland began to plot. Piece by piece, he built a plan that was as cold as it was precise. He enlisted a 9-year-old named Damon Man Cotton as the shooter. Cotton's girlfriend, Ashlyn Durham, would serve as the getaway driver, and another girlfriend, Alexis Abeta, would play the role of coordinator, buying bullets, setting up calls, and helping arrange every detail. Every message sent from the jail was cloaked in code. Guns were controllers. Bullets were pieces. Cotton was promised up to $3,000 for pulling the trigger. Every role was clear, every step was laid out, and every move was made with one goal in mind: to end the life of Kevin Brown, Sr. On January 25, 2022, that plan came to life. The black Chrysler 200 with its bent fender idled on Beacon Way for more than 10 minutes, waiting. Inside, Durham gripped the wheel, while Cotton crouched in the back seat with a rifle. From his cell, Breland had arranged a three-way call to lure his father outside. Kevin, still holding his phone, walked toward the mailbox, unaware he was stepping into an execution. Cotton leaned out the window. The sound of the gunshot tore through the neighborhood. Kevin collapsed instantly, his life ending in the same moment he thought he was following his son's voice on the other end of the line. It was not just a murder. It was a betrayal written in blood, the kind that no one in Fort Worth, or beyond. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because the deeper detectives dug into the case, the more twisted the truth became. The murder of Kevin Brown wasn't just about gang life, or jealousy, or revenge. It was about family secrets so tangled and disturbing that they pushed a son to do the unthinkable. But what exactly drove Breland to believe his father deserved to die? Was it rage, shame, or something darker, an obsession with betrayal that consumed him until there was nothing left? There's so much more to this story that will leave you speechless. If you find it worth listening to, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The final hours of TeeTee Dangerfield's life began like any other summer night. Atlanta's July heat lingered well into the evening, the air thick and sticky. But the mood at the Cascade skating rink was light and full of laughter. To many in the city, the rink wasn't just a place to skate, it was a cultural landmark, a hub of music, style, and community. For TeeTee, it was a place to unwind, to escape the stress of the week, and to embrace the people who made her feel most alive. TeeTee had recently celebrated her 32nd birthday. Friends described her as full of joy, a woman who loved to dress in bright colors and who carried herself with both confidence and softness. She was a transgender woman living authentically in a world that often refused to make space for her identity. But those who knew her best said she refused to let fear define her. She wanted to be seen, one friend later explained. Not just as a trans woman, but as TeeTee. A sister, a friend, someone who made you laugh until your stomach hurt. That Sunday night, she arrived at the skating rink in high spirits. Music pulsed through the speakers, skates gliding across the polished floor as the DJ blended hip-hop classics with Atlanta trap beats. TeeTee was in her element, smiling, chatting, dancing with friends between laps. On the outside, everything seemed normal. But in hindsight, there were subtle moments that now carry an eerie weight. Witnesses recalled her stepping outside a few times, her phone buzzing in her hand, conversations whispered quickly before she slipped back inside. Who was she talking to? Was it a casual friend, or someone who would later play a role in her death? The Cascade skating rink had long been a sanctuary for Atlanta's Black LGBTQ community. It was a space where you could exist freely, where identity was celebrated rather than hidden. But like all sanctuaries, safety could be fragile. As the night wound down, TeeTee gathered her things and prepared to leave. She told friends she'd be fine, that she was heading out to meet someone. Just before she left, she flashed a smile and a wave, the kind of farewell that felt routine, unremarkable. No one imagined it would be the last time they'd see her alive. The parking lot outside was dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the asphalt. It was just past 4 a.m., a dangerous hour when the city's energy shifts, when nightlife dissolves into something darker. TeeTee slid into her Mercedes-Benz, a car she took pride in, a symbol of her hard work and her refusal to live small. But as soon as she turned the key, her world shattered. Gunshots rang out in the stillness of the night. Neighbors later reported hearing a rapid succession of pops, followed by silence. TeeTee was hit multiple times, bullets tearing through the windows of her car. Struggling, bleeding, she somehow managed to press her foot against the accelerator. The Mercedes lurched forward, careening out of the parking lot and towards South Gordon Road. But within moments, her body gave way. The car slowed, veered, and finally stopped. When police arrived, the scene was devastating. TeeTee was found slumped in the driver's seat, her body riddled with bullets. The windows were shattered. Glass scattered across the seats. There were no signs of robbery. Her purse remained, her phone still buzzing with unanswered calls. Whoever pulled the trigger hadn't wanted her belongings. They had wanted her gone. The officers on the scene radioed in the discovery. What they didn't yet realize was that this was more than another homicide in Atlanta. This was a crime that would reverberate far beyond the city limits, striking a painful chord within the LGBTQ community. Word of TeeTee's death spread quickly. Friends rushed to the scene, some collapsing in grief as yellow crime scene tape was stretched across the area. For many, disbelief was the first reaction. How could someone so full of life, someone who had just been laughing and skating hours earlier, be reduced to a name on a police report? But disbelief soon turned into anger. Atlanta was no stranger to violence, but the pattern was undeniable. Black transgender women were dying at alarming rates, and their killers were often never brought to justice. TeeTee became one of more than 15 transgender women murdered in the United States that year, and it was only July. As detectives began piecing together the crime, questions swirled. Was this a targeted attack motivated by transphobia, or was TeeTee caught in something more personal, a relationship turned sour, a dispute that escalated to violence? Friends insisted she had no known enemies, no involvement in dangerous activity. Yet the whispers in the community told a more complicated story. Some said she had been seeing someone secretly, a man who feared exposure if their relationship was revealed. Others suggested jealousy, or a confrontation that spiraled out of control in the parking lot. With no surveillance cameras capturing the moment, detectives were left with fragments of testimony and a city full of speculation. Still, the brutality of the act could not be ignored. TeeTee had been shot repeatedly, execution style. Whoever killed her had wanted to send a message. But what was that message, and to whom? In the days following her death, vigils were held across Atlanta. Candles flickered in the night as mourners held signs with her name, demanding justice. Activists spoke with urgency, pointing out that TeeTee's murder wasn't isolated. It was part of an epidemic, a pattern of violence against transgender women, especially Black transgender women, who faced not only the threat of violence but also a justice system that often treated their cases with indifference. As one activist said during a vigil, "We're tired of seeing our sisters' names on hashtags. TeeTee's life mattered. She deserved more than this." But behind the public mourning, detectives continued their search. They combed through her phone records, traced her last calls, and interviewed friends who had been with her that night. Slowly, a narrative began to take shape, one that hinted TeeTee's killer might not have been a stranger lurking in the shadows, but someone far closer to her world. The truth, however, would not come easily. And the deeper investigators dug, the more tangled the case seemed to become, because as it turned out, TeeTee wasn't just another victim. She was a woman whose very existence challenged the biases of society, and that meant her murder carried layers of complexity, secrecy, and silence that would make finding justice all the more difficult. And as police soon discovered, the shadows surrounding TeeTee's final night weren't just cast by her killer. They were cast by the world she lived in, a world that had already placed her life at risk long before the first bullet was fired. Detectives arrived at the crime scene just before dawn, the sky still heavy with night. TeeTee's car sat idling at the side of the road, its headlights glowing faintly like the eyes of a wounded animal. Officers methodically combed the area, documenting bullet casings, shattered glass, and blood patterns. Every detail mattered, yet none offered the clarity investigators desperately needed. The first and most pressing question was why. Nothing was missing from her vehicle, no signs of forced entry. This wasn't a robbery. The precision of the shooting suggested intent, but intent born from what? Rage, fear, or something more complicated. By sunrise, news of the murder had reached local media. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, broadcasting images of the Mercedes-Benz wrapped in police tape. "Atlanta woman found shot to death in her car," the headlines read. But for those who knew TeeTee, those words carried an omission. She wasn't just a woman. She was a transgender woman, and in the world of violent crime, that distinction often changed the narrative, not always in ways that helped the victim. Inside the Atlanta Police Department, detectives opened TeeTee's case file. They began with the basics. Her phone. Digital forensics revealed that in the hours before her death, she had exchanged a flurry of text messages. Some were with friends at the skating rink. But one thread stood out. It was with a man whose name police withheld from the public. The messages were cryptic, short, almost rushed. "You coming out? Yeah, wait for me. Don't keep me long. Don't keep me long." The timing of those texts, minutes before TeeTee left, the rink painted a haunting picture. Was this man the last person to see her alive? Detectives traced the number. It belonged to a prepaid phone, registered under no real name, a common tool for anonymity. When investigators tried to locate its signal, it was already powered off, leaving them with a digital ghost. Meanwhile, friends filled in the gaps with their own theories. TeeTee, they said, was dating discreetly. Some of the men she spent time with were not openly accepting of their involvement with a transgender woman. In a city like Atlanta, vibrant yet still conservative in certain pockets, such relationships were often kept in the shadows. For some men, exposure carried consequences. Lost reputations, broken families, even violence. That secrecy raised alarms. Could TeeTee's death have been the result of a double life colliding? A man desperate to keep his secret hidden? Or perhaps someone else who knew of the relationship and felt betrayed? Detectives pushed deeper. They canvassed the Cascade skating rink parking lot, asking witnesses what they remembered. One person recalled seeing TeeTee talking to a man near her car earlier that night. His description was vague. Tall, medium build, dark hoodie. Another remembered hearing raised voices, though the words were muffled by the music pulsing from inside. Was it an argument, or just casual banter? But the most haunting clue came from TeeTee's own phone. Hours before the murder, she had posted a picture to social media, smiling, dressed for the night, full of confidence. Beneath it, friends had left heart emojis, birthday wishes, playful comments. In hindsight, the post felt like a goodbye note, an image frozen in time, her joy forever captured before violence erased it. The investigation stalled almost as soon as it began. Without video surveillance in the parking lot, without witnesses willing to step forward with concrete details, detectives found themselves trapped in a web of speculation. And as days turned into weeks, the urgency of the case risked being buried under Atlanta's rising tide of homicides. But TeeTee's community refused to let her be forgotten. Activists flooded social media with hashtags number justice for TeeTee. Vigils were held, candles lighting up Atlanta streets, as speakers called out the epidemic of violence against transgender women. TeeTee's death was no isolated tragedy. It was a pattern, one that demanded attention. National outlets soon picked up the story, amplifying the outrage. Human Rights Campaign issued a statement, placing TeeTee's murder within the larger context of 2017's rising violence against trans women of color. "We cannot ignore this epidemic," they declared. TeeTee's life mattered. Yet while the public demanded justice, detectives privately admitted frustration. Leads had dried up, witnesses were silent, and the prepaid phone, their most promising breadcrumb, had gone cold. Still, one detail nagged at investigators: the way TeeTee was killed. Multiple gunshots, close range, in a personal space like her own car. This was not random. This was someone who knew her, or at the very least, someone who wanted her silenced. Theories multiplied. Some said it was a hate crime, a targeted attack rooted in transphobia. Others insisted it was personal, perhaps tied to intimacy or betrayal. But no matter which angle detectives pursued, The evidence remained elusive, and then came the rumor. A whisper circulating through Atlanta's LGBTQ community that a man who had been secretly involved with TeeTee was under pressure, that he feared exposure, that her death was not just about identity, but about power, control, and silence. Police never confirmed the rumor, but it spread like wildfire, fueled by suspicion and grief. If true, it painted TeeTee's murder not as a random act of violence, but as a calculated effort to erase her existence to make sure her truth never saw daylight. Weeks passed. Her funeral came and went, friends and family weeping over the loss of a woman who had brought them light. But justice? It remained out of reach. And as the months wore on, one haunting question lingered, unanswered. Did TeeTee die because she lived as her authentic self? Or because someone else could not bear for that truth to be known? The night TeeTee Dangerfield was murdered, Atlanta gained another unsolved case number. But for her friends, her family, and the city's LGBTQ community, she wasn't a statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a woman who carried laughter into every room she entered. And yet, within days, the investigation into her death began to slip into the shadows, swallowed by the silence of unanswered questions. Her funeral was held under the heavy weight of grief. Mourners filled the pews, their tears mixing with anger. The open casket revealed a face softened by makeup, framed by hair that had once danced freely when she skated. Friends whispered to one another as they passed by. She didn't deserve this. She never deserved this. As the service ended, a pastor spoke words meant to comfort, but which only sharpened the pain. TeeTee's journey was her own, and she walked it with courage. We must remember her joy, but also demand her justice. The congregation erupted in applause, not of celebration, but of defiance. For them, grief could not end with burial. Outside, activists held signs that read, "Her name was TeeTee, and Black trans lives matter." They demanded answers from Atlanta police, pressing officials to classify her murder as more than just another homicide. This wasn't random, they insisted. This was a hate crime, an execution of identity, but law enforcement, careful in their language, refused to commit. "We're exploring all motives," one spokesperson said in a press conference. "Nothing is being ruled out." Those words, meant to project diligence, instead deepened the sense of frustration. To TeeTee's community, the hesitation to acknowledge her identity as a factor felt like erasure all over again. As weeks stretched on, the silence from detectives grew deafening. No suspects named, no arrests made, no updates released. Each unanswered call to the precinct left friends more convinced that TeeTee's case was slipping through the cracks. And yet, the media stormed ahead. National outlets began picking up her story. The Human Rights Campaign, GLAAD, and other advocacy groups cited her death in reports highlighting the staggering violence faced by transgender women of color. In 2017 alone, TeeTee became one of at least 15 transgender women murdered in the U.S. by midsummer. Most were Black, most were young. Most cases, like hers, remained unsolved. The press painted a chilling picture. "Black transgender women?" One headline read, "Face a life expectancy of just 35 years. It wasn't hyperbole. It was data, and TeeTee's death had just become part of the statistic. Still, amidst the activism and headlines, A darker undercurrent brewed. Rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers of secret lovers, men leading double lives, and dangerous entanglements hidden beneath Atlanta's nightlife. Friends confided in reporters off the record, fearing retaliation. Some insisted TeeTee had been seeing someone who wasn't public about their attraction to her. Others claimed jealousy was involved, perhaps another partner, perhaps someone who felt betrayed. But no one would put names on record. Fear kept lips sealed. That fear was part of the trap. In cases like TeeTee's, silence was as deadly as bullets. Without witnesses willing to testify, without insiders ready to reveal what they knew, investigators were left piecing together fragments. Each fragment only added to the suspicion that the truth was buried in relationships too dangerous to expose. Meanwhile, the LGBTQ community of Atlanta organized louder than ever. Vigils turned into marches. At every event, her face smiling, radiant, alive was printed on posters and banners. Yet for all the activism, for all the national attention, the man who pulled the trigger remained nameless, faceless, hidden, and the silence of law enforcement only deepened the wound. For TeeTee's family, the grief was unbearable. Her mother, her siblings, they struggled to reconcile the brutality of her death with the vibrancy of her life. She had been their joy, their pride, the one who lit up holidays and family gatherings. Now, she was gone. And worse, they feared her story would be reduced to nothing more than a headline in a long list of tragedies. Her friends refused to let that happen. They spoke about her in interviews, describing her humor, her love of fashion, her kindness. One friend said, "She was just trying to live. She wanted love like anybody else. But for some people, our lives are disposable. That's how it feels." Behind the scenes, detectives quietly pressed forward. They re-interviewed witnesses, rechecked TeeTee's phone records, and dug into her digital footprint. Still, the trail remained cold. The prepaid phone, the cryptic messages, the last sighting of a man in a hoodie, none of it led anywhere concrete. But the most haunting element wasn't the lack of evidence. It was the sense that someone in her circle knew more than they were admitting. A name, a face, a truth too dangerous to say aloud. In the LGBTQ community, that suspicion carried a chilling echo. How many more TeeTees would there be before the silence was broken? And then, just as public interest in her case began to fade, whispers surfaced of another violent attack, this time involving another black transgender woman in the South. The details were eerily similar. Secrecy, intimacy, violence. TeeTee's story was no longer just her own. It was part of a broader pattern, a storm gathering force across the country. The unanswered question grew louder. If justice could not be found for TeeTee, what did that mean for every other woman walking in her footsteps? As summer turned to fall, the streets of Atlanta still carried TeeTee's name in chants, her face on posters, her story whispered in community meetings. But outside of vigils and rallies, a troubling reality settled in. No arrests, no suspects, no justice. Her case had slipped into the limbo that so many transgender homicide investigations fall into, a void where silence swallows answers. By September 2017, TeeTee had become one of at least 22 transgender people murdered in the U.S. that year. Advocacy groups warned that the number would only rise before the year's end. Most of those victims, like TeeTee, were black transgender women. And like her, most of their killers walked free. To many activists, the pattern was undeniable. Black transgender women lived at the dangerous intersection of racism, sexism, and transphobia. They were often pushed to the margins of society, denied stable employment, safe housing, or reliable health care. These vulnerabilities made them targets, and when violence struck, their cases too often received little urgency from law enforcement. In TeeTee's case, those failures felt personal. Friends accused Atlanta police of dragging their feet, of treating her murder as routine rather than extraordinary. Reporters covering the case noted how quickly official statements dried up, leaving the public with more questions than answers. For the transgender community, this wasn't just negligence, it was systemic. Again and again, they had seen names like TeeTee's women whose murders were left unsolved, whose lives were treated as expendable. One activist at a rally declared, if TeeTee had been a white woman in Buckhead, her killer would already be in handcuffs. Instead, she was a black trans woman in East Point, and now we're told to be patient. We've been patient long enough. The words echoed through the crowd, a raw truth no one could ignore. National media began to take notice. The New York Times, NBC, and CNN ran features highlighting TeeTee's story alongside the growing epidemic of trans murders. Hashtags like #ProtectBlackTransWomen trended on Twitter. For a moment, it seemed her name might spark real change, but change came slowly. Each time another transgender woman was killed, TeeTee's story resurfaced, but only briefly before the news cycle moved on. Advocates worried that, like so many before her, she would be remembered as a statistic rather than a person. And yet, those who knew her refused to let that happen. Her friends told stories of her love for skating, of her jokes that could break the heaviest silence, of her courage in living openly despite the risks. In interviews, her sister described her as the kind of person who gave more than she had, even when she was struggling. But the most painful interviews came from those closest to her secret life. Anonymous voices, muffled by fear, admitted to reporters what police had quietly suspected. TeeTee had been involved with men who lived in silence, men who loved her in private but denied her in public, men who, if exposed, stood to lose everything. That secrecy, activists argued, was killing women like TeeTee as surely as the bullets did. The stigma forced relationships into darkness, where violence thrived unchecked. It's not just hate crimes, one advocate explained. It's the culture of shame, the fear of exposure. And when that shame mixes with toxic masculinity, it turns deadly. Investigators knew it too. In homicide cases involving transgender women, the perpetrators were often intimate partners, men terrified of their double lives being revealed. But proving it in court was another matter. Without witnesses, without cooperation, cases like TeeTee's hit dead ends. Months passed. Her name faded from headlines. Her mother begged for updates, often met with silence or vague reassurances. "We're still looking into it," police would say. But those words offered no comfort. For TeeTee's community, each day without answers felt like a betrayal. And the larger truth was harder still. Even if her killer was found, even if justice was served, nothing would bring her back. Nothing would erase the fear that her sisters carried each time they walked home at night, wondering if they too might become the next name on a poster. By the end of 2017, TeeTee's case remained unsolved. She was buried, mourned, and memorialized, but not avenged. For activists, her story became part of a larger rallying cry: protect trans lives, especially black trans women. But beneath the chants and candles lay a haunting silence. Someone out there, someone who likely knew TeeTee, someone who may have even claimed to love her, had pulled the trigger. And that person was still free, their secret still intact. The epidemic raged on. In 2018, more trans women were killed. In 2019, the number climbed again. TeeTee's name appeared in advocacy reports, her photograph printed alongside dozens of others. Her case became both symbol and warning, a reminder that justice delayed often means justice denied. And yet, for those who loved her, one question cut deeper than statistics. Would her killer ever be named? Or would TeeTee's truth, like so many others, remain buried forever in silence? Years have now passed since the gunfire that ended TeeTee Dangerfield's life in the early hours of July 31st, 2017. Yet her name refuses to fade. It lingers on banners at marches, whispered during vigils, etched into advocacy reports. For her family, her friends, and her community, she remains more than a case number. She is the laughter that once echoed through roller rinks, the vibrant smile captured in photos, the woman who dared to live authentically and paid the price for it. But her case, like too many others, remains unsolved. No arrests, no charges, no trial. For all the noise that once surrounded her name, the hashtags, the headlines, the rallies, the silence of justice has been deafening. Her story became part of a pattern so familiar it almost feels scripted. A black transgender woman murdered. Her life cut short. Her case unsolved. Advocacy groups document these names every year, counting them as grim reminders of an epidemic. The statistics are staggering, yet each number represents a life, a person with dreams, humor, struggles, and love. TeeTee is one of them, but she is also all of them. Her death sparked difficult conversations about secrecy, stigma, and violence. For many, she became a symbol of the danger faced by transgender women who dare to exist in a world that too often denies them safety. Activists pointed out the uncomfortable truth. Many of these murders are not committed by strangers, but by men who once claimed intimacy, men who lived double lives, men whose fear of exposure turned deadly. TeeTee's story also exposed systemic failures. Police departments often misgendered victims in initial reports, erasing their identities, even in death. Investigations stalled, evidence went cold, and families were left without answers. For TeeTee's loved ones, that failure wasn't just an oversight. It was another wound layered on top of grief. Still, her community refused to let her be forgotten. Each year, on Transgender Day of Remembrance, her name is read aloud alongside others lost to violence. Candles are lit. Faces in the crowd bow their heads, some weeping quietly, others standing defiantly, demanding change. Her photograph, her radiant smile is held high as a reminder. She lived. She mattered. And she should still be here. But remembrance is not justice. And as the years slip by, one haunting fact remains. TeeTee's killer is still free. Somewhere in Atlanta, or perhaps far beyond it, the person who fired those bullets carries their secret. They may walk the same streets, shop in the same stores, or smile in the same crowds. To this day, they have escaped accountability. That absence of justice forces an uncomfortable reflection. What does it say about society when some lives are treated as disposable? when the deaths of women like TeeTee are met with candlelight vigils but no convictions? How many more names must be added to the list before change comes? For TeeTee's mother, the pain is a wound that never closes. She once said in an interview, "I just want to know why. Why my baby? Why that night? Why hasn't anyone come forward?" Her words cut to the heart of the tragedy. Answers may exist, but fear and silence keep them hidden. And perhaps that is the most chilling truth of all. TeeTee did not die in a vacuum. Someone knows what happened in that parking lot. Someone knows who pulled the trigger. Maybe it was a man terrified of being exposed. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it was raw hatred. But whatever the motive, the silence around her murder is not just about one person. It is about a culture that allows silence to protect killers and bury victims. Today, TeeTee's story stands as both a warning and a call to action. Her name is invoked in classrooms, advocacy trainings, and panels on LGBTQ safety. Her photograph circulates online each July, a reminder of what was lost. She is both remembered and forgotten, immortalized and erased, and for those who loved her, the grief remains suspended in time. They cannot move forward because the case has not moved forward. They cannot find closure because justice has never come. The final question, then, is one that refuses to leave. How many more candles must be lit before justice is more than a word? How many more TeeTees must there be before the silence breaks?